Hello, and welcome to The Resource, the podcast propelling employer brands to recruit smarter and retain better. I am your host, Priscilla Peters.
And I'm your other host, Scott Dismuke. And Priscilla, this is a big day. This is a big event for the Resource podcast, because this officially kicks off season 2 of the podcast, which is exciting for a lot of reasons. I think first and foremost is that they're actually letting us do a season 2.
I know, right? We got a season 2. I know you're going to talk in a little bit about how we actually have a couple of sponsors that have reached out wanting to sponsor the podcast, which is kind of hilarious for you and I, to be honest. But this has been so much fun. We've been kind of looking back at just looking at how, as we're going forward and planning for season 2. Our producer, Sydney Moore, she's been going back and looking at, the season that we had previously. And it's funny. I almost forgot we interviewed Bruce Pearl.
Like a year ago.
He was where was he? He was like at ESPN or something,
yeah,
right?
I think he was down in Orlando at the ESPN Wild World of Sports, or whatever they call it, Wide World, whatever. And I was actually, I think, doing some recruiting. And so he, pulled out his cell phone and actually recorded it on FaceTime. But yeah, that was certainly a highlight for me to get to interview him. And he was fantastic. And I would encourage anybody to go back and listen to it because I think, and we talked about this in the episode, that I don't think a lot of people realize that in between his stints at Tennessee and Auburn, he actually worked in the trucking industry. So he has some insight on the trucking industry, and obviously being a recruiter in basketball, had some pretty interesting feedback on recruiting and retention and things of that nature. So that certainly was a highlight. That was a whole lot of fun. I would really like to interview him now that Coach Cal has come to Arkansas. That would be really, I would really love to talk to him now. I don't know if we need to go back to that well twice, but that was certainly, that was a lot of fun to do. Very cool to be able to kick off the podcast by interviewing him. And I hope folks will go back if they haven't heard that interview and listen to him, because he's very, very entertaining and has a lot of great insight on some things.
Yeah, that was a fun one. We also had some great, we had a couple of economists. We had Bob Costello from ATA, and we had Tom Albrecht, who they both kind of provided some really good insight. Those were great episodes. We're doing our episode today is much like another one that we had when we covered our fall driver survey. Mm-hmm. So I know we're going to get to that here in a minute, but I think it's important to point out that when you and I hopped on today, we're both wearing pink.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever seen you in pink. So for those of you who are listening, you might just want to go check out Conversion's YouTube channel. That's where we, or you can go to the Resource webpage, because the video's there as well. But we are both in pink, which I thought was quite funny when we hopped on today. Quite fitting.
Yeah, I offered to find a different shirt, but Priscilla just insisted that we wear pink together. My wife tells me I look good in pink, so I'm going to believe her. So
I think you do. No, that's funny. But we've had a good time. We've learned a lot about podcasting, I would say, along the way. Sydney's really going to help us up our game. We've got some plans, and but it's going to be fun rolling into season 2. If y'all have anyone you would love us to interview or have on the podcast, please shoot us an email. It'll be in the show notes, and let us know who you would like us to have on, because, we just want to help people recruit and retain, right?
That's right. Yeah. So normally at this time, we would do kind of transition into the Resource, where we give you guys some exciting data points. But since this episode today is going to be a little bit different, as we're going over our spring driver survey, we're going to kind of skip that, because all of today's episode is really going to be a bunch of data points. But normally that's kind of where we would go into this. But instead, we'll kind of transition into our first 5. And the cool thing about the first 5 now in season 2 is that it's actually sponsored. Like Priscilla said, we've We've gotten some feedback from some folks that are interested in sponsoring the podcast. We think that's fantastic. If you're listening, you'd be interested in sponsoring, you can reach out to Priscilla or myself. We would be happy to listen to you and figure out a way if you want to partner together to sponsor the podcast. But Priscilla, I'll kind of turn it over to you and let you introduce our very first sponsor, who is now going to sponsor our first five.
Yes, we are excited for today's episode because we're going to talk through some firsthand truck driver opinions on our driver survey. But first, let's hit our final mile first five, sponsored by driver.jobs, your destination for hiring the drivers you need for your final mile operations. Driver.jobs, matching the right drivers with the right opportunities for every last mile. Okay. Instead of doing a full first five, since we don't have a guest, right? We're going to do one that we're going to ask each other. We don't know how we're going to answer. Matter of fact, I'm not going to lie. I just looked at it this morning to see what the actual question was. I'm going to ask you first, Scott.
Okay.
What's the weirdest food combination you've ever tried and secretly liked?
So normally I don't mind answering these questions, and because I usually have an answer I'm very confident in. This is an answer that I'm not going to lie, you're probably going to ridicule me. My wife ridicules me, but this is kind of a childhood thing. It's not necessarily something that I do to this day. But when I was in school, when I was in grade school, growing up, small town, Southeast Missouri, it never failed. Every Friday, particularly during the fall and the winter at school, on our lunch days, every Friday was chili day. Okay. And that's a whole other episode in and of itself, why you would load up, K through 12 in chili and then stick them in a room for an afternoon is beyond me. But we would have chili day, and they always served chili, and they would have these cinnamon rolls. And let me tell you, these cinnamon rolls in and of themselves were fantastic.
I remember school cinnamon rolls.
They
Yeah.
were the best. They were the best. And I don't know if it was kind of the sweet and salty kind of thing, but it was a school thing where people would dip the cinnamon roll in the chili, and we would eat and I know it sounds awful, and my wife thinks I'm absolutely insane. And but I've heard other people that have done this too. It's not something I practice. I make chili all the time during the winter, particularly during football season, but I don't make cinnamon rolls too. But there's a little nostalgia there. I don't mind the kind of cinnamon roll chili mix. It's weird. It's awful, but that's the question. What's the weirdest one? I've secretly liked it.
Okay. So I'm sorry, I have to do a follow-up. When's the last time you dipped a cinnamon roll in a bowl of chili?
It's been a while. It's been a while.
Okay.
It's not something I actively. It's like every time I have a bowl of chili, I have to have a cinnamon roll. I'm just telling you, I've tried it. I secretly like it. It's not something I have to do. But if I just happen to have a cinnamon roll, it would not bother me to dip it in the chili and eat it.
Okay. Well, that definitely qualifies as a weird food combination.
Yeah, I'm sure nobody respects me anymore, and I'm going to be ridiculed and all of that. But that was the question. So please have something a lot weirder, so I feel less guilty.
I don't know if it could get much weirder, but I'll tell you mine. This is the first thing that came to mind, and mine's from my childhood too. And I haven't done this in a while, but I'm thinking I might need to. When I was young and I would go to my Meemaw's house, I call my mom's mom my Meemaw. My grandmother, we called her Meemaw. And I grew up in small town Arkansas, and she would make us in the summertime. I don't know why I equate this with summer. Maybe because I was over at her house more during the summer because I wasn't in school. But she would make pickle butter sandwiches. So it's a piece of white bread with butter, and not like toasted or anything like that. Just a normal piece of white bread, butter, and then pickles. And you just fold it in half, and it's a pickle butter sandwich. That sounds kind of gross. I loved a pickle butter sandwich. I haven't had that it's been decades, but I might have to whip one up tonight. I don't have white bread in my house, but yeah, pickle butter sandwich. That would be mine.
That makes sense to me.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big pickle fan, but that makes sense to me. I mean, it's no cinnamon roll and chili, but
Do you see the meme? I see the meme all the time. Like, a good marriage is made up of a person who wants to eat their pickle and the person that doesn't, so that you can always give your pickle
yeah,
to.
yeah. Like my wife, like when we go to Chick-fil-A, she wants extra pickles. I want no pickles.
Me too. I want all the pickles.
So I have to say, and I'll ask you this: one of my other weird combinations, and this is something that I do to this day. I will put French fries on my cheeseburger.
I don't think that's too odd. I mean, I don't personally do it, but I don't think that's too. I don't. This is gonna be weird for you. I don't like cheese on my burger.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, so that's weirder than I'm sorry, that's weirder than
I
cinnamon rolls and
know.
chili.
People always say cheeseburger. I'm like, just burger. And I love a burger, but I don't, unless it's Swiss cheese with mushrooms. I'll do that combo.
See, and I don't even like Swiss cheese; it's too bitter. But yeah, all right. Well, you should have just said that. You should have said that. That's your weird food combination: is you don't put
But I
cheese on a
don't do
burger.
cheese on my burger. I know I'm that person. If you go somewhere and they're grilling burgers, I'm like, hey, could you do some without cheese? And everybody looks at me like, what is
Yeah,
wrong with you? And it's weird because I love cheese. I just don't love it on my burger.
yeah. I wish you hadn't have said that.
Are we not friends? Are we
Well,
not friends now?
I'm not gonna say that, but I will have to say a special prayer for you at church on Sunday.
Oh yes, oh yes. Okay, so that's our first five. Today it's one of five. But we'll continue to do that. And we want to thank Driver.jobs for sponsoring our first five. So we are going to dive into our spring driver survey. Scott, you want to give a little context into how we do this and
Yeah,
all that fun stuff?
yeah, absolutely. So, those of you that have followed us for the last couple of years, even before the podcast, know that, and we started this actually back during COVID. We did a driver survey on COVID, and so we do two surveys each year to drivers. So we do one in the spring, one in the fall. This one we sent it out to about 18,000 drivers via email. We got a little over 1,900 responses. Super happy with that. A little over a 10% response rate, which we're very, very pleased with. I believe we conducted this from kind of around the end of March through April. So it was out for about probably 5 to 6 weeks out in the field. We collected responses and then have spent the last few weeks working on putting all of the data reports together that by the time this is available for you to listen to will have already been dropped. And so we're very, very pleased with the response on that. Probably one of our best responses to date that we've received on our driver survey. So super, super pleased with that. And kind of Priscilla, I'll kind of kick it off with you and let you introduce the first question, because the first question is really one that we ask on all of our surveys and kind of monitor kind of how that trends from time to time. So I'll kind of kick it off to you.
Yeah, so the first question that we always ask is, are you currently looking for a truck driving job? Like, we really just want to get a pulse on what percentage of drivers are looking for a new job today. So in the spring, this 60% of them said no and 40% said yes. Now, I will say, Scott, I believe this is the highest it's ever been for those saying yes since we've been doing the survey, correct?
That's right. About a 7% increase on what it was in the fall.
Yes, so that's pretty significant. So what does that tell us, right? So if I'm a carrier in the market, if I'm interested in honestly hiring and retaining drivers, a couple of things to keep in mind here is that we're starting to see turnover kind of tick up a little bit. So as freight is improving, we're hearing rumblings of that in various little pockets of the market, right? And as the economy kind of comes back, competition returns, we're going to see that happen. But the real interesting part of it is we always follow it up with, okay, are you currently looking? If you said yes, why? And so I think the follow up to that is as important as the number, to be honest. And number one, top of the list, is the soapbox you live on many days, right? Is that whole idea of predictable pay to the tune of 81%. So they got to pick, let's see, they chose all that apply. So we gave them pretty long laundry list of reasons they might be looking, and they selected all of them that apply. And the top three were predictable pay, better home time, and consistent miles. So, I mean, at the end of the day, how you really, Scott, you always emphasize this whole idea of when you're talking about pay, the predictability of it is critical. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but 81%, I mean, that's almost all of them.
Yeah, and I think, listen, and I've told several carriers that I've talked to in the last few weeks this. I think as this thing turns, whenever it turns, I think we're going to be looking at a situation that is probably going to be worse than it was during COVID from a driver standpoint. And I think drivers have been relatively patient throughout this freight recession. I think we saw that even in the fall results when 33% said that they were looking for a job. I think we're starting to see some of that patience wear thin. Now, one of the questions we asked, we're not going to talk about today, is how optimistic are you that the freight recession is coming in to an end? That actually dropped a little bit from the fall as well. But I do think that that's what drivers are looking for is yes, pay rate does matter, okay, but the predictability of that pay and how they can budget as a family or as a individual to how they're going to pay their bills, and having that. I think you could even look at the consistent miles as being part of that, right? Because the consistency of the miles is going to speak to the predictability of their pay. I think that how you or how a company communicates not only how you pay, but the clarity and the predictability of that pay is going to be important. And again, my other soapbox is the whole guarantee pay. I think you got to be really careful about how you're communicating the guarantee pay as well, because again, if you've listened to this in the past, you know how I feel about that. You know that it's not really a guarantee; it's conditional. So if you're out there promoting a guarantee pay, be really careful about how you're communicating that, because the first time a driver doesn't get the quote unquote guarantee, they're more than likely gone, because when they hear guarantee, they assume whatever that number is, that's going to be the number on their paycheck. So I would be very careful about that. So the communicating of the predictability of the pay and how you pay is extremely important right now, because I'm telling you, as this turns, we are going to have I think a bigger driver shortage issue than we did back during COVID.
Yeah. So just to kind of recap on this one. So we asked, are you currently looking for a truck driving job? 60% said no, 40% said yes. We covered a couple of we asked the follow up why, and we covered some of those. One thing I will point out on another one that showed up on why, which was number 4 on the list, was better benefits. So benefits matter. They've been kind of showing up here lately on the past few surveys that we've done. So I would just encourage you to really kind of look at that, figure out what types of questions drivers are asking. Also, a lot of fleets are offering day one benefits.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not, that's something else to kind of think about. But then we also asked if you said no, if you said I'm not currently looking for a truck driving job, why are you not looking? And so we asked them, that. And the number one reason was, I'm waiting for the economy to improve, which that's kind of scary for those who, are looking closely at their turnover and their retention. And then I need more experience was number 2. So the bulk of those drivers are saying, I might be looking when I've got the experience that I need to move on and when the economy improves. So that's kind of a little bit of a caution for the industry as a whole as we're trying to retain drivers. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking, that's 25%.
Yes.
If you combine those two, that's 25% of drivers that technically, very well could be looking for a job in the next 6 months. So if you're listening to this, take 25% of your fleet, whatever your fleet is, 25% of that fleet, imagine them actively looking for a job within the next 6 months, because That's kind of the magic number from an experience standpoint that drivers want to get to, because that opens up other opportunities for them from an experience level standpoint, particularly daily home time jobs. But
Yeah.
the other thing is, hopefully within the next 6 months, we have a little bit of a shift in the freight economy where things have changed. And again, this number, kind of the 16.2% that said they're waiting for the economy to improve, that was actually a 3-point jump from what it was back in the fall. So that number has gone up too, which kind of again speaks to why I think that some of the patience is beginning to wear thin on drivers, and they're becoming a little bit restless, which is why I think that when this does kind of finally come to a halt, or we shift a little bit from a freight market standpoint, I don't think that turnover is necessarily going to improve when the economy improves. I think that once it rebounds and companies start becoming more active on the recruiting front, they start offering sign-on bonuses, I think drivers are going to be on the move. And so I think right now is extremely important to be out in front of as many issues as you possibly can to keep your drivers in your truck.
Yeah, and historically, it doesn't. Historically, turnover does not improve. Matter of fact, it gets more challenging when the economy does improve and freight improves. So we'll see. Okay, what else? What you got?
So here's the second one, and this one was really interesting, totally kind of off the beaten path as it relates to kind of what we've normally asked, but we've recently seen and a lot of information about electric trucks. So that was something that we really wanted to gauge how the drivers felt about electric trucks. And so we asked them if they just had a positive or negative feeling about electric trucks, he tried to say. And honestly, the response was a little surprising, at least to me. I don't know about you, Priscilla, but 72.3% of the drivers said they had a negative feeling about electric trucks. 27.7% said they had a positive feeling about trucks. So just kind of, I want to get your first reaction to that just in hearing those numbers, because to me it was a little, I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't this. So kind of what's your first initial thought?
Yeah, I kind of expected it to be a little closer to 50-50. I was surprised it was that high. But I will say, I think, and I know this is like the marketing person talking here, and this is the world we live in, but I think it's it's more of a perception thing than a hey, I've experienced electric trucks and I have a negative feeling. It's in a lot of cases, in most cases, they have not experienced it. And they formulated these opinions, right or wrong. I'm not saying either way, but like when, like, remember our last episode and Schneider, I mean, a leader at Schneider is talking to us about how they have this fleet of 92, I think he said, electric trucks, and he said the drivers love them.
Yeah,
So, and I'm not saying that, that blankets everything, but I do think that there is a perception issue that we're going to have to really target here
sure.
if we end up adopting this technology in these types of trucks, and I think we probably will ultimately in
Yeah.
some way.
Yeah, I think to some degree. And if you go back to the last episode, like Priscilla mentioned, listen to Rob Reich with Schneider, he really dove into their electric fleet and what they've been doing, and really had some great insight on the drivers and how they feel about it. But I think you can really tell. We did ask a follow up question to how their feelings about trucks, electric trucks were, and we asked them, if you said negative, why did you see negative? And the interesting thing is, it's not really one thing that stands out. And Priscilla, I think that goes to your point that this is a perception deal, because the four choices that they had were lack of infrastructure. So we do know, when we talked about this with Rob, that charging stations, that is obviously going to be an issue from an infrastructure standpoint. So 27.7% said lack of infrastructure. 28.8% said the reliability of the equipment. Now, here's the interesting thing to me. Rob never even mentioned any kind of maintenance issues with trucks, right? So I can't imagine that the reliability of the equipment, and again, I don't know, I am by no means an expert on electric trucks, but I can't imagine that the reliability of the equipment is worse than what our normal trucks are dealing with, right? So, but that's 28%. So I do think that's a perception issue. Performance and mileage concerns, 22%. And then 21% said lack of knowledge or the unknown. So there's really no one issue that sticks out. It's really kind of across the board. which I think goes to really the lack of knowledge and the unknown. I don't think any of us really know unless you really have been in it, which why I really love to get Rob's, when we interviewed Rob last time, we actually knew some of these results, right? So I was really interested to kind of get his take on that. And I think there's another thing at play here, and I don't want to get political, but let's be honest, electric vehicles, whether they're trucks or cars, has become a political issue, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so I do think that you do have some politics at play here where people are going to have a negative connotation because it has become a political issue, much like any other issue that you bring up today that becomes political. Electric vehicles has become a political issue, and whether you agree with them or not, there are certain things that are probably positives about electric trucks. And again, I encourage you to go back, listen to Rob, right, with Schneider when he talked about it, because he talked about a lot of the positives, but he didn't sugarcoat it either. He talked about the challenges of the electric trucks as well. But I do think ultimately it comes down to what you said, Priscilla. I think if the trucking industry is going to shift into using more and more electric trucks, there's going to have to be a great marketing and communication campaign to drivers to explain the benefits and the why behind electric trucks, because this is, if you're in the electric truck business, this is a little bit of a concerning number as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and I think too, I mean, honestly, and we tell clients this, that drivers believe other drivers. So once drivers start telling the story of what it's like to drive an electric truck, whether that be good experience or bad, we're going to hear about it. So they're going to be ambassadors on both sides
Hmm.
probably, but it'll be interesting to see how the opinions of this change as these types of trucks are adopted more and more, because there might be some folks that pop in and say, hey, y'all need to drive one, because some of the things Rob said, they're much quieter. They can get rolling faster, all just random things that he talked about, which I had never really thought of.
Yeah. Well, and
So
he even mentioned the smell. That was the one thing that kind of stuck out to me. You don't
yes,
think
yeah,
anything of,
that's
but the
right.
diesel certainly has a smell that the electric trucks don't have.
Yeah, it's interesting. It'll be interesting. So that was another one. Another um question that we ask, and we have asked this one before as well, is we ask them on average, how frequently do you encounter recruitment messages or advertisements from carriers other than your current employer? And we asked this one, I think, let's see, in spring of 2023. So a year ago, we asked the same question. At that time, it was about 50.3% said they were being contacted at least once a week. This time it was 52.1%. And then it goes down 16.6 were contacted more than twice a month, 12% at least once a month. And you can kind of download the survey and see all of the data behind it. But at the end of the day, over half your fleet is being recruited every single week by someone besides you. So I mean, and I always say this begs the question: how are you recruiting your current drivers today? Because a lot of times, we'll hire a driver and put them in their truck and let them go on their way, and everything's hunky dory, right? Well, in the meantime, they're being bombarded. And I don't think that's overestimating or over exaggerating, okay? Because we're not even talking about the passive type of advertising that they're seeing on social media. As they're scrolling through their feeds on their phone, they're encountering a lot of employer brands, okay? And maybe not aggressively, maybe not, hey, look at this job, but hey, here's Joe and he works for ABC Trucking and you need to listen to him. But it really begs the question, how are you recruiting your current fleet? Because most carriers spend a lot of money to recruit drivers. Depending on where they need drivers, some of those locations are tough to find driver talent in. But how are you actually investing in recruiting your current fleet? And I think that's a really good question to ask your team. We always ask folks, and I know y'all ask this. I mean, this is kind of your wheelhouse, Scott, but we always say, who's in charge of retention? Like who's in charge of basically who's in charge of recruiting your current fleet? And they don't really, a lot of carriers don't really look at it that way. I would say one of the biggest oversights that fleets have today is they're not recruiting their current drivers while everyone else is. And so
Yep.
that's what the data says. So I think that's interesting. It did creep up a little bit, a couple percentage points year over year. We like to keep an eye on it just to see, but that's kind of a good challenge to go back to your carrier with and say, okay, we need to look at this and how we are actually looking at combating those messages that they're really kind of facing every day.
Well, and our earlier points, you better be doing it now because it's going to shift. We know it will. We don't know when, but it's going to shift. We see it in the numbers here. Drivers are going to look. And so one of the questions, because you're right, it's all about recruiting your current fleet. I literally was having a conversation about 2 weeks ago on this very same thing. And the question I always get when I tell, are you recruiting your current fleet? Because others are. They're like, so what do you mean by that? How do you do that? And so here was the example that I gave them. So I'm going over their data with them, and pay was the top issue for them. And the president of the company says to me, he said, I don't understand this because we've done research and we're within the top 5% of our pay. And my response to that is, do your drivers know that?
Yeah.
And the answer was no, they don't. So what does it mean to recruit your current fleet? Is all about communication. It's all about keeping them in the loop. It's all about telling them things like that. This is where we are. It's all about saying, "Hey, I know that freight is slow right now, or we've had to adjust our rates to keep customers because of A, B, and C." It's all about giving them the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's all about making them feel a part of the team. And honestly, and I think this is one of the bigger challenges. We literally just had this conversation in our internal staff meeting this morning. Is the challenge that the trucking industry has is that we have two segments of employees. We have ones that work within the walls of our office, and then we have another segment that work outside of the walls. And our challenge is, how do we treat those two segments the same way? And what I mean by that is we have to figure out a way as an industry to treat drivers the same way we treat the employees that work within the walls of our office. And let me give you the example I always give on that. We hear this all the time. A driver reaches out to us and says, I have a mistake on my paycheck. So we're checking, we make sure that it's truly a mistake. And let's say that it is. Okay. 9 times out of 10, that company tells the driver, hey, we'll fix it on the next check. They don't do that with people in the office, or at least I hope they don't. If there's something wrong with my paycheck, payroll fixes it right then. If there's something wrong with people in our office with their paycheck, we fix it right then. But we have drivers wait. And I just don't think that's right. I think if it's our mistake, we fix it right then. But sometimes I think as an industry, we expect drivers and ask drivers to do things that we wouldn't ask our other personnel to do within the walls of our office. And I think the challenge for us as an industry is we have to figure out a way, even though we have two segments of employees, one inside the walls, one outside the walls, we have to figure out a way to treat them as one, even though they are separate. And even though it is a different scenario, that's our challenge. That's our challenge. And until we do that, we're going to continue to have issues like this. And so that's a culture thing at the end of the day. It's a culture
Yeah.
thing. And that culture starts at the very top. And so that's my soapbox for right now.
Yeah, no, I hear you loud and clear. It's basically a priority that's got to be moved up. I mean, that's what I always say. You have to move it up. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so we'll see.
So let's move to the last question here. And again, we're only going over 4 of these questions. There are far more questions on this survey. So I encourage you to go and download the survey if you haven't already to see the other questions that we've asked on this survey, because there's some really great stuff. But I'm actually really interested in your feedback on this one, Priscilla, because this one's kind of, I think, in your wheelhouse. So we asked drivers, before starting your career as a truck driver, what field were you working in? And there's a lot of responses on here that I'll just kind of give you the top three, and then I'm just kind of wind you up and let you go because I'm interested in your feedback here. But the top three were warehousing at 15, almost 16%, construction at about 12%, and then manufacturing also was about 12%, and then there's several others. I will tell you the one that surprised me the most, and then I'll shut up, was healthcare. The healthcare, it was about 5%, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but there were a lot of people in the healthcare nursing that had come into trucking, which surprised me a little bit. But Priscilla, what say you?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different things to that we need to look at. One, as an industry, right? Like, I had a conversation with a client the other day who was in our office, and we were talking about, and they have a student program. They hire guys. They sponsor guys and gals, I should say, guys and gals. And so we were talking about that and how that's been successful for them. And he said, you know what? We have people call us and they basically say, this is our last resort. I heard that being a truck driver, I can make good money, and this is my last resort. And I thought to myself, we got a problem as an industry if driving a truck is a last resort for folks. Now, I don't think that's true for everybody. But what this data is showing us, and the data of the age of a new driver entering the industry, I think the average age is like 35. That tells me that trucking is becoming a second and third career for folks, or is not becoming, it is a second and third career. So the first like big kind of question I think we have to ask ourselves is, how do we get to the point where it becomes a choice for their first career? Now, we all know we have the hurdle of the whole 18 to 21 gap. We're actually working on getting some a guest related to that for this season. So stay tuned for that, just where we can talk about like where we are, that I know there's a pilot program, all the things kind of happening. But I think that we have to look at, I think this is an industry problem, but then I also think that it's an opportunity, because when you look at all of these different options these talent pools, if you will, that we have, it's an opportunity and it's also a challenge, because we're basically going after what's called the underemployed market, especially if we're getting folks new to the industry. Now, if you're hiring experienced drivers, you're going after drivers who have experience, who've been in the industry. If you want super experienced drivers, that's kind of a little bit of a different breed. But if we're looking at what industry did you come from before you got here, and some of these industries we're competing against, like we just shared we do this data rundown with our clients, and we just shared that construction jobs are double what they were a year ago, year over year, which means, and construction's on this list, right? So there's more job opportunities. Now, if I'm a driver, or if I'm a carrier that's competing against that, I can say, yeah, you're going to have more construction jobs. You're going to have more opportunities today because of all the infrastructure bills that have been passed and all this construction that's going on. But guess what? Those are contracts. You may only have a job for 2 years. That's not a stable career. Somehow we have to tell the story that truck driving is a very stable, very well paying career, because we know that it is, right? And so I think that just as an industry, and there's a lot of initiatives kind of going on around this. I know ATA just launched a new campaign, and some other folks in the industry, are working on this type of thing. But I think that it's one of those things you have to do on the grassroots level from your carrier's perspective. But then you also need to really kind of get involved and see how you can help just in general. But I mean, we are going to be fighting for talent for years and decades to come. We have been for decades. But the interesting part is going to be, as these generations, as these boomers are retiring out, how are we going to grab some of these younger folks that are coming into the industry? And how do we get the perception of the job of a truck driver to be a little bit different? And I think that's the challenge, because we know, those of us in the industry know. I tell people all the time that don't work in trucking, I'm like, you do understand that truck drivers make a very, very good living. Now, yes, depending on it is a tough lifestyle, right? Like depending on the type of job it is, but they make a great living. In many cases, they have great benefits. But we're not hearing that story as much. I will say COVID did help, I feel like that kind of gave us like this hero mentality that has really helped. But that's just kind of my takeaway, Scott. I think it's industry together, we have to do it, but also you have to figure out for your fleet the type of drivers you need. And then I mean, when you look at it as an opportunity, I would really go after some of those. I mean, I would go after in your messaging. Yeah, you have a construction job, will you, in 2 years? Because you're going to have a truck driving job in 2 years. Matter of fact, you're going to be making more money in 2 years. I mean, I would hit it head on, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, COVID, I think, did help. But I unfortunately think the back end of COVID that we're going through right now hurt. And what I mean by that is a lot of those drivers that came in
Yeah.
with kind of that hero label that got put on our drivers that frankly are heroes. That those are the drivers right now that are either frantically searching for that COVID pay that everybody was getting during COVID, or they've left the industry altogether. And so I think that's going to be part of the challenge once this thing flips around too, because we did see a lot of people go into the construction and warehousing over the last 12 to 14 months during this recession. So yeah, I think you're spot on all of that, 100%.
Yeah, so like Scott said, we only covered four of the questions. I think there's 12 or so, 11 or 12
Something like
questions
that.
that
Yeah.
we have in the survey. So we'll have the link for you to download that in the show notes. So go and check that out. You can also go to the resource.conversionia.com to check that out as well. So what a way to kick off season 2, Scott. I like it. I
Yeah.
like it. I'm excited. So thanks so much for listening today. If you had fun, give us a virtual high five by leaving a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. And be sure to hit that subscribe or follow button so you never miss an episode.
If you've got questions or feedback, you can reach out to us on social media or drop us an email, and all of those details will be in the show notes. And we'll be back next time with more fun, data, and insights to help you ace your recruiting and retention game. And more importantly, we will be wearing different colored shirts next time, Priscilla. I hope you guys have a great day, and we will see you next month.